Hello everybody. In today's video, we will be discussing logic arguments for and against the existence of God. This is the first video I've made about philosophical topics such as this. Researching and creating this video was so much fun, but also rewarding and exciting. I think I will be making more content like this in the future, so please, if any of y'all have interesting thought experiments, paradoxes, or any other philosophical concepts you would like to see me cover, comment below what they are. To clarify where I'm coming from when making this video, I have a comparatively small breadth of knowledge when it comes to most philosophical concepts. I attended university for an engineering degree, and while there I took only one philosophy class on ethics, so I have nowhere near the level of expertise on subjects like this as many others do. The topic we are discussing today has been one of the most thought out and debated philosophical thought concepts ever conceived, so naturally we have a lot to cover. In a lot of these arguments, I'm going to be lumping many different philosophers together that had similar ideas and concepts to the argument I am discussing. However, many of these philosophers' fully fleshed out arguments might be very different from the paraphrased, generalized argument I am discussing. If at any point in the video you feel I have not given a particular concept, philosopher, or logic train justice, just know that you are probably right, and feel free to comment your own opinion on it in the comments section below. One further comment I'd like to make before we dive into this video is about my own religious beliefs. I am a Christian and have been for my whole life. That being said, I did not make this video with the purpose of preaching to y'all, or attempting to sway anybody to one particular side or anything like that. This is just a topic that is very interesting to me. While I do plan on discussing my personal opinions on it toward the end of the video, my intent is to fully show all the cards both sides hold when it comes to debating this topic. Now that all that is out of the way, let's begin discussing logic arguments and theism. The first step in any discussion of philosophical concepts is to define what you are actually discussing. For this video, we'll be operating under the basis of classical theism, since it is probably the most widespread way of viewing theism in the West, as well as the most conducive to a debate like this. Classical theism characterizes God as the metaphysically ultimate, first, and timeless being, the Alpha and the Omega. He is seen as the creator and designer of the universe, and all that exists within it. Therefore, it is also a tenet of most classical theists that human beings cannot wholly understand or even truly define what God is, since this would contradict his perfect nature. This view of God is widespread among all three of the Abrahamic religions, as well as most monotheistic or Western religions. Now, the format for the majority of this video will consist of me outlining a philosophical argument for the existence of God, and then outlining the counters to that argument. This is a natural structure for a debate like this, since the burden of proof falls on those arguing for God's existence. Most arguments from the atheistic position are designed to counter the theistic arguments. The cosmological argument, also known as the causal argument or the contingency argument. The cosmological argument for God's existence is probably the easiest to grasp, and therefore it is the first argument we'll be covering in this video. This idea is built upon the principles of cause and effect, as well as linear time. Many philosophers have created their own versions of this argument with varying degrees of complexity, but it can essentially be boiled down to this. Everything that exists was caused by something else in the past, which already existed. If we go backwards in time to the creation of the universe, something must have happened which caused the universe to exist. This something must be God. Thomas Aquinas, a philosopher from the 13th century, described this as the uncaused cause. And in ancient Greek philosophy, similar ideas of unmoved movers were used to describe this concept. The 10th century Islamic philosopher Avicenna was a proponent of a similar idea which he called the necessary existent. While sounding quite simplistic at first, there are several interesting implications of this argument that may line up with classical theism. The first is the timeless nature of God. Since we live in a universe that appears to move forward linearly, that means that time exists. If time exists, it must have been caused by something. This cause must be timeless, since it needed to exist before time in order to create it. If this cause is God, then God must be timeless as described by classical theism. Furthermore, if God is timeless, then he must be the one thing that exists without cause, since we cannot go back in time to see what caused him. That means he must be the first, ultimate, and timeless being that is described in classical theism. This argument has a very easy to grasp and intuitive structure, but is not without its flaws. For one, this argument suggests that there was an original, timeless cause to our universe, but this cause does not have to be God the way that we think of him in the West. The casual argument is built on the idea that everything has a cause, so by making God the one exception to that idea, this argument defeats its own premise. There's no reason why the universe itself is not the exception to this idea. That is to say, it is just as plausible to assume that God is the uncaused cause as it is to assume that the universe itself is. Furthermore, this argument assumes that time was created, with a start and a potential endpoint, which is something that cannot be proven with any degree of certainty. It is a possibility that time itself may be endless in one or both directions, and therefore time itself may be timeless, and would not require a timeless cause to create it. These critiques point out the flaws in the basic premise of the cosmological argument, that we can retrace time to find the original cause to the universe, and also that this cause must be God. The ontological argument. The ontological argument is, in my opinion, one of the weakest for the existence of God that we will be discussing in this video, but it is still a very important argument on this topic. It is historically one of the oldest in the Western tradition, being first proposed by Saint Anselm of Canterbury in 1078 AD. The argument is based on the true divine perfection of God, that is, the perfection is part of the literal definition of God. The argument goes something like this. Let us imagine the most perfect being we possibly can. This being exists in our minds, but if it existed in reality, it would be even more perfect. Therefore, this being must exist in reality, because if it just existed in our mind, it would not be the most perfect being we could possibly imagine. 17th century French thinker René Descartes was a proponent of this argument. In his philosophical book Meditations, he outlines that since God can be conceptualized as the perfect being, and since he can imagine God, God must therefore exist, since existence is a prerequisite of perfection. Essentially, the idea of a perfect God that does not exist could not be imagined, since if he did not exist, he would not be perfect. There are quite a few critiques of the ontological argument, and not just from those arguing entirely against the existence of God. Many opponents to this argument are religious philosophers, such as Thomas Aquinas, who was mentioned in the previous argument. For one, this argument appears to break one of the norms of classical theology and Western tradition, since it proposes that humans are capable of truly understanding and perceiving God's perfection. One of the tenets of classical theology is that God is not able to be truly defined by humans due to his transcendent nature, and therefore it can be inferred that humans are equally incapable of imagining this perfect being. How can someone imagine a perfect being that's very nature cannot be wholly defined by a human being? Furthermore, this argument can be disproven through the use of a simple thought experiment. If I'm hungry for a sandwich, so I decide to myself I will imagine the most perfect sandwich for lunch. This argument would seem to suggest that this sandwich would materialize in front of me instantly. Since the most perfect sandwich in the universe materializing in front of me would be even more perfect if it actually existed, then the sandwich should exist, since if it didn't, it would not be the most perfect sandwich, and therefore I would not be able to imagine it as the most perfect sandwich. We can see the flaw in this argument, not only because the sandwich does not in fact appear before me, but also because it relies too heavily on what each individual person may define as perfection. If my perfect sandwich has ham and yours has turkey, we both have two different ideas of the perfect sandwich in our minds, and therefore one or both of our concepts of perfection must be flawed. This shows that in order to imagine the perfect being, we must first understand what perfection is, and classical theism claims that only God can truly understand himself and his perfection. The argument from desire. Before delving back into the meatier arguments at the end, I wanted to go over some of the shorter arguments with fewer proponents. This one is described as the argument from desire. Its most famous advocate is the writer C.S. Lewis. Here's a direct quote from C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for these desires exists. A baby feels hunger, well there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, well there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire, well there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. In this quote, the basic argument is outlined. This train of logic can be summed up in 3 steps. All natural desires are for something obtainable. Humans desire perfect goodness, righteousness, joy, and peace. Therefore, these things must exist, and they come through God. This argument is founded on the belief that the desire for something is predicated on its existence. That is, we desire food because food exists. If food didn't exist, then our desire for it would exist in a vacuum. It would have never occurred in nature. If we then shift this way of thinking over to some of humanity's more abstract desires, such as for justice or joy, this implies the existence of an ultimate conclusion to these desires, that being God. It's a rather simplistic argument, but there is a certain poetic beauty to it since it gives humanity's more noble traits a purpose as evidence for something more perfect than ourselves. The desire in your own heart for peace is evidence of the perfect peace encompassed by God. The desire for justice is just a taste of the ultimate justice to come. Even if our desire on this earth may never be satisfied, their existence implies that perhaps in another life they will be. As C.S. Lewis puts it, we remain conscious of a desire which no natural happiness will satisfy. But is there any reason to suppose that reality offers any satisfaction of it? A man's physical hunger does not prove that that man will get any bread. He may die on a raft in the Atlantic. But surely a man's hunger does prove that he comes of a race which repairs its body by eating and inhabits a world where eatable substances exist. In the same way, though I do not believe that my desire for paradise proves that I shall enjoy it, I think it is a pretty good indication that such a thing exists and that some men will. While I like this argument and find it to be one of the more beautiful arguments I will be going over in this video, it is not without its fair share of criticisms. For starters, this argument makes a hefty leap from the existence of joy to the existence of an ultimate joy encompassed by God. Saying that I desire a hamburger may imply the existence of hamburgers, but does not imply the existence of the end-all be-all of hamburgers, after which consuming my desire for hamburgers will finally and ultimately be sated. I don't know why I'm using a lot of food metaphors in these critiques. I must be hungry. Opponents to this argument point out that while it is true many people desire joy, righteousness, and justice, these desires may only imply their existence in the natural world. The fact I desire joy may only imply that I can have it now in this life, but it does not imply that joy must exist in the next. Argument from beauty. The next argument we'll be discussing is known as the argument from beauty, or sometimes also referred to as the aesthetic argument. Its most outspoken proponent is probably Richard Swinburne, a British theological philosopher. I will now directly quote from him since he sums up this argument better than I ever could. God has reason to make a basically beautiful world, although also reason to leave some of the beauty or ugliness of the world within the power of creatures to determine. But he would seem to have overriding reason to not make a basically ugly world beyond the powers of creatures to improve. Hence, if there is a God, there is more reason to expect a basically beautiful world than a basically ugly one. A priori, however, there's no particular reason for expecting a basically beautiful rather than a basically ugly world. In consequence, if the world is beautiful, that fact would be evidence for God's existence. Here, the basic argument is that in a randomly constructed, orderly universe, the odds of humanity developing on a planet with the level of natural beauty Earth has is incredibly small without any divine influence. Furthermore, this argument extends into the laws of nature and mathematics themselves, the very same laws that hold our universe together. Physicist Eugene Wigner wrote in 1960 that the miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulations of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. We should be grateful for it and hope that it will remain valid in future research and that it will extend, for better or for worse, to our pleasure, even though perhaps also to our bafflement, to wide branches of learning. This statement is essentially arguing that the beauty of mathematics makes sense, since mathematics is developed by humans and is almost purely hypothetical. However, the fact that many of the laws of physics we've discovered through experimentation line up with the laws of mathematics means that the natural order of the universe is aesthetically pleasing, and even on paper, the laws holding everything together have a natural beauty to them. There's no reason we can think of why the laws of nature should line up with the artistic language of mathematics as developed by humanity so well, to the point that it would seem it cannot be coincidental. This would seem to imply that whoever designed the laws of nature also designed humanity to have the types of beauty-seeking minds that would be able to develop the hypothetical art of mathematics in such a way for it to line up with the laws of the universe themselves. Finally, there's the issue of why humans even value beauty in the first place. There's no evolutionary or survival reason why we would stop to gaze at a sublime mountaintop or enjoy bouquets of flowers. There's no natural reason why we provide extra food for artists and musicians so that they can, in turn, produce works of art for us to enjoy. Why do melodies and songs, or paint strokes, or lines of poetry have the ability to stir such strong emotions within us? In the natural world, it makes no sense that humans would have any appreciation or even conception of beauty unless we were created by someone who did. Opponents of the argument from beauty are quick to point out that the entire concept of beauty exists only in the mind of the individual observing it. Essentially, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Although there may not be any evolutionary reason for humans to develop an appreciation of beauty, there may be intense psychological ones. Furthermore, there's the classic argument of the infinite regress problem when discussing most theistic arguments. When used to critique this argument, the infinite regress poses the question: if God created humans to admire beauty, then who created God to admire beauty? Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, spells out why humanity's propensity for the arts cannot serve as proof of God's existence. In the book he states, obviously Beethoven's late quartets are sublime. So are Shakespeare's sonnets. They are sublime if God is there, and they are sublime if he isn't. They do not prove the existence of God. They prove the existence of Beethoven and of Shakespeare. A great conductor is credited with saying, if you have Mozart to listen to, why would you need God? Argument from design. We have reached the last and probably the meatiest argument for God's existence in this video, the argument from design. Also known as the teleological argument, it points to the improbability of our universe being created in such a way that something as complex and intricate as humanity would have ever developed. Just listing the basic variables needed in the modern understanding of how humanity came into existence, the Earth must have been placed within the exact Goldilocks zone around the Sun. Liquid water must have been introduced to the Earth, and an ozone layer needed to develop in order to protect the Earth from the Sun's radiation. Furthermore, life had to have started from a random chemical reaction and through the process of millions of years of evolution eventually lead to humanity. And this is just the factors that needed to be exactly right in order for humanity to exist. For the creation of human society to have been established, a whole host of other variables needed to be exactly right, such as the tilt of the Earth being used to produce the seasons necessary for agriculture. Even the moon orbits and revolves around the Earth at exactly the right speeds for only one side of it to ever face us, and its phases have been used for thousands of years by humans to track the passing of time. The odds of all these factors lining up in order for our existence to be possible are beyond astronomical, and therefore, the only likely explanation is that an intelligent designer has set everything in motion to lead to this point. There is an old Jewish story accredited to the Rabbi Meir from the 2nd century AD. In this story, the rabbi is told by a philosopher that he does not believe in the existence of God. The rabbi then recites a beautiful poem to the philosopher, which moves the philosopher greatly. The philosopher then asks the rabbi who wrote this poem, and the rabbi replies by telling him that a cat once knocked over a bottle of ink onto one of his scrolls, and the ink fell in just such a way for the words of the poem to have been splattered onto the scroll. The philosopher instantly refutes this, saying, "It is not possible. There must be an author. There must be a scribe." The rabbi then states, "How could the universe come into being by itself? There must be an author. There must be a creator." There is another common analogy used in this argument known as the watchmaker analogy. It was popularized in 1802 by William Paley in his book Natural Theology, but the origins of this argument go back much later. I will now state this analogy by quoting directly from Paley. Suppose I found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. I should hardly think that for anything I knew, the watch might have always been there. Yet why should not this answer serve for the watch as well for a stone that happened to be lying on the ground? For this reason and for no other, namely, that if the different parts have been differently shaped from what they are, if a different size from what they are, or placed after any other manner, or in any order than that in which they are now placed, either no motion at all would have been carried on in the machine, or none which would have answered the use that is now served by it. The analogies in both of these arguments are attempting to equate the absurdity of assuming a poem has no author, or a watch no maker, with the absurdity of assuming our universe, which is much more complex and finely tuned than any watch or poem, to have no designer. Criticisms for this argument vary greatly, so I will begin with the simple counters. For starters, if humans are truly so complex and sophisticated that they must have been designed by a higher power, there are some parts of us that suggest that this design was not so perfect after all. Our appendixes, which have no notable use in our body and occasionally burst, seem like a crucial design flaw. The fact that women's pelvises are smaller than infants' heads is another imperfection, and one that has led to thousands of deaths throughout history. These are just two of the imperfections of human anatomy. If we were to list all of the flaws in human society and the planet it exists on, this video would be 1,000 years long. There's also the classic counter to most theistic arguments, the infinite regress. Variants of this counter can be made for almost all previous arguments described in this video. When it comes to the argument from design, the infinite regress argument simply states that if our universe is truly so complicated and intricate that it must have been designed, then the designer must therefore be even more intricate and complicated. And that must imply a designer of the designer, and so on and so forth. A more specific counter to the argument from design is that even if we were to accept that the condition humanity finds itself in are truly too improbable to be pure chance, many philosophers have argued that this only proves a designer of the universe, but it does not imply that this designer must be God in the way we think of him now. 18th century French philosopher Voltaire once wrote, "I cannot conclude anything further than that it is probable that an intelligent and superior being has skillfully prepared and fashioned the matter. I cannot conclude from that alone that this being has made matter out of nothing, and that he is infinite in every sense." He's essentially stating that even if we assume the universe was designed, it does not prove that the designer is also the creator. Prussian philosopher Kant, from the same time period as Voltaire, sits in a similar position, stating that the argument from design proves at most intelligence only in the arrangement of the matter of the universe, and hence the existence not of a supreme being, but of an architect. Finally, there are arguments that revolve around showing why reality itself must create the conditions necessary for life. A lot of these theories revolve around quantum mechanics, and I will absolutely simplify quantum mechanics down to nothing in order to get across the arguments these people are making. So if any of you are quantum mechanics nerds and are upset about how much I'm butchering it, just let me know what I'm doing wrong in the comments. I would love to make videos about quantum mechanics someday, so please just let me know which topics I should delve deeper into. The first theory that counters the teleological argument is the multiverse theory. If multiverses exist, that is, if infinite other realities exist, then the odds of our universe existing do not really matter, since it must exist somewhere. The same could be said for the theory that time itself is infinite in either one or both directions. If this is the case, then everything will occur. Every possible universe will be created and destroyed infinitely. Therefore, the low odds of our own universe being created do not really matter, since it will be eventually. Both of these arguments point out that the argument from design only really works if we assume our universe to be the only one in existence, or at least the only one out of a finite number in existence. Finally, the most complex argument for why our universe, or at least a universe like it, must have come into existence has to do with the observer's effect on quantum states. If an electron is in a quantum state, we cannot know its location until it is observed. Once it is observed, however, at that exact moment, it behaves as a particle, and its exact location can be known. Now, this observer does not need to be conscious or even intelligent to produce this effect. It just needs to be any physical object that can be expected in good faith to act according to the laws of classical physics, and has an apparatus that can be used to measure information about the electron. Humans can later inspect this object to determine the location of the electron at the moment that the non-sentient object observed it. Here's where the crucial breaking off point from generally accepted quantum physics occurs into more tabloid, New Age quantum philosophy. There are some who point out that while the position of the electron was recorded by a non-sentient apparatus, Its position was only truly known in a way that matters when an intelligent being observed that apparatus. Therefore, some jumped to the conclusion that sentient life's observation is still fundamentally necessary for that electron's hypothetical position in its wave state to have collapsed. Following this train of logic, if the universe was created and no sentient life capable of observing it ever developed, then there would have been no one to observe the universe, and therefore it would never have truly existed. This idea essentially states that conscious life forms are necessary for reality itself to exist. It is the ultimate if a tree falls in the woods statement. If reality in the universe it exists in can only truly exist when it is observed by a sentient being, then the universe is at least required to exist in a way which will produce sentient beings. This could explain why all the different variables lining up for our own existence could have occurred without a designer, since they would have had to occur in order for sentient life to be able to observe its universe. Miscellaneous atheistic arguments. Like I said, most atheistic arguments against God's existence are meant to counter theistic arguments, since the burden of proof falls on the theistic side. That being said, there are a few detached atheistic arguments that I have not yet covered in this video. Most of these arguments simply point out the often paradoxical descriptions given to God by classical theism. The most famous is probably the statement that God cannot be all good, all-knowing, and all-powerful, since if he was, there is no discernible reason why evil should exist at all. Another paradox can be made just by looking at one of these definitions. If we assume God is all-powerful, that means he must be able to do anything. That would include making a rock that even God couldn't move. But if God couldn't move it, then he must not be all-powerful. This means either God cannot create such a rock, or if he could, then he couldn't move it. There are many more paradoxes like this, but since this video is already pretty long, I will be moving on to the last section of this video. Closing statements. Wow guys, we just covered a lot of ground in this video, and I hope I left y'all a lot to think about. This debate is probably as old as religion itself, and I'm sure it will go on and continue for as long as humanity does. I just wanted to finish off the video here by making a few personal statements on my thoughts on this matter. First of all, I think we all need to accept that there's no logical way to prove or disprove God's existence entirely. We could have known that from the beginning of the video, that when classical theism states humans are not capable of wholly understanding God's nature, that this was truly going to be an impossible task. Many philosophers have made the argument that this whole debate is pointless and a waste of time. Some Christian thinkers arrive at this conclusion as well, and are of the opinion that belief in God should come from faith and faith alone. As a Christian, I recognize the importance faith has and its role in our beliefs. But I'm not of the opinion that since we cannot prove God's existence through logical arguments, that we shouldn't try. The human mind is an interesting, fickle, and sometimes scary place, but there's no denying that it can also be a powerful tool for reason and logic. I would even go as far as to call it a gift. In the New Testament, Jesus states one of the two most important commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. I believe the human mind, this experience of consciousness, is truly a gift from God. And if we are truly meant to love God with all our minds, this includes the rational parts. For me, this means at least attempting to see God's nature through logic and rationalism. Even if we recognize this to be an impossible and even futile task, it will at least give us a better appreciation and awe for the truly transcendent and encompassing nature of God. While researching this video, I've looked at my own beliefs from a different perspective, and I feel it has given me a rounder appreciation for this debate and a healthy respect for the other side of the argument. So if nothing else, I hope this video has done the same for you. Thanks for watching. Be sure to comment any further ideas you have on this topic, or any other video essay-like videos you would like to see me make. Have a good day. Happy Thanksgiving.